I'm Pat Reid, Outsource consulting CFO and controller. Been at it for 30 plus years, and I bring all those years of experience to bear on privately held businesses for a fraction of the cost. When we broke the sound barrier in 1947, the engineers who designed that jet engine capable of that did not mount it on a biplane. They didn't even mount it on a World War II fighter. They had to build an entirely new structure, an airframe that could handle that sort of stress and the dynamics of flight at that speed. So it is with the company. If you've got an engine, a sales engine equivalent of achieving Mach 1, then you've got to have the infrastructure that's going to be able to support that. You've got to be able to have the operations, the fulfillment, and my area, the accounting function. Because if you can't bill it, you can't collect it, and you can't pay for it, you're going to self-destruct, much like the biplane would with that kind of an engine attached to it. The other hot button issue for me is planning. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. If you do know where you're going, you can chart your progress against those goals, against that goal, and know when you're drifting and know when you're not. One of the best, most reliable aircraft ever built is the C-130 Hercules. And one of the reasons it almost always gets where it's going is because there's a navigator on there. And the navigator not only prepares the flight plan, which is the equivalent of the business plan. He's not on the ground when that plane goes wheels up. He's on the aircraft, and he's got radar going out 150 to 200 miles looking for weather systems that are going to disrupt them. And when he sees that, he has to amend the plan. He has to notify the command pilot, the CEO, and they have to do something. They have to react to it. So he's looking ahead. That's the equivalent of projecting, constantly projecting month in and month out, looking at the results of operations, reprojecting, seeing where you're going, and making adjustments accordingly if it's not in keeping with the plan that you set up in the first place. So projecting and forecasting is critically important to any business. The key to figuring out if you're spending money in the right places is A, knowing your industry, knowing the so-called metrics in your industry. What do the statistics in your industry tell you? And there are a lot of industry trade associations and things that can provide that information. But also knowing your own financials and then comparing them to the industry. So I know there's a software product out there now that you can subscribe to that'll tell you typically what the gross profit in your industry should be, what your payroll should be as a percentage of sales. That sort of data are available. And if you don't have it, go get it, know your financials, and you can start figuring out whether you're spending money in the wrong areas or just spending too much money in the wrong areas. It's very easy to spend in the wrong areas because a lot of it's done on emotion. But there are ways to check that, and it's usually statistical, and the history is out there by industry to do that. By the way, the product is Profit Sense, and you can subscribe to it. Making sound financial investments for your company involves first recognizing that it's an investment and not classifying it as an expense. For example, you might have the opportunity, or you might be approached by a consultant of some sort, whether it's me or somebody in a different field. A lot of times the tendency is to look at it as an expense and try to figure out whether it's worth it or not, and I can't afford that right now. The key to the question is it an investment? Because investments always have returns. Or should. Well, they always do. Could be negative, could be positive, or it could be a return on investment of zero. But the first thing you have to do in making that decision is to see it as an investment and not just an expense. An expense is spent money, it's done. An investment creates a return. And so when you're looking at the potential of buying a new system, what's it going to do for you? Is it going to make things simpler on your staff? Is it going to allow you to grow the business without growing the staff and therefore the payroll? Those sorts of things are not so concrete and not so black and white, but they are returns on the investment. So I think the first thing you have to do, recognize an investment as apart from an expense, and then start figuring out the return on it and deciding if it's worth it. Well, some of the things you can look at, particularly from my side of things, the accounting side, is the software you're going to use. Don't go out and get software that's limited to what you're doing right now. It's going to cost you more probably to go out and get a bigger system, but it's going to be a more scalable system. I put a system in a few years ago into a company, and it could have been viewed as overkill, but the company actually did grow into it. And instead of putting in something smaller and having them bump up against a ceiling, a glass ceiling, if you will, on the software. So technology is a big deal on my side of the fence when it comes to being scalable. I guess another possibility is we tend to look at people a lot of times in positions as overqualified. Well, think a little bit bigger than that. Maybe the person you're classifying as overqualified is just what you need to take the growth of your business to where you really think it's going to go and where your goals are set for it. Don't be short-sighted, in other words. Buying more equipment, you need to upgrade your production facility. You can certainly finance it. Banks, commercial banks, happy to do that. The terms are going to depend on a number of things. And depending on the size of your company, the history that you have, you may or may not have to provide a personal guarantee. You're probably going to have to put up collateral at minimum, the equipment, and maybe expand it beyond that. You're going to have to pledge your receivables. But just as importantly is how you're going to get that loan in the first place. And you're going to have quality, reliable, timely financial statements. If you go to ask for the loan and the most recent financial statements you can give the bank are 6 months old, chances are they're going to hesitate, if not say no. If every time you ask for a financing piece like this, a facility, you have to struggle to get the statements, it's going to slow down the process, if not stop it. So it's important that you have a quality department cranking out financials, reliable financials on a timely basis. And that's how you get that sort of financing. How you choose the equipment is, the best in the industry. You've got to know your industry. You've got to know where you're going, because you might have a choice between a machine that's going to take you for 2 more years or a machine that's going to take you to the growth you want to do in 10. And of course, you're going to have to play that off. Will the machine last 10 or it will only last 5? You've got to know where you're going, and you've got to know what you can afford, even including financing. And what's the life of that equipment? And how does it come recommended to you? What's your industry say? Do you belong to any industry organizations that'll help you with that? Trade organizations that'll help you evaluate the best equipment for what it is you're doing. So it's the quality of the equipment, how well does it do what it does, how long does it last, and what's it capable of with respect to where you're going. Will this machine operate 24/7 if that's what you've got to do to produce what it is you think the market's going to demand and what you can fulfill? If it can't, maybe you think about the more expensive one, check the financing on that and see if you can afford it and if you can justify paying for it. Back to the financial statements, what they need to tell the bank is, I can repay this loan, because that's the only reason banks lend, is to get their money back with interest. And so what you should have in the form of your financials is not just the history, but the projection with the loan included, showing how it's going to get paid down. And if you can do that, you're going to be ahead of 90% of the small companies out there asking for loans, and you're going to be well ahead of the game in getting approval from the bank. To grow your business, there are 2 ways to do it. One, every aspect of every department and how to run each one, and you have the time to do that. And nobody can do that. The other is to delegate, and that's, in my opinion, the only way to grow a business. The advantage of pulling in consultants like me is that you get to do it on an as-needed basis. You don't have to put full-fledged CFO in a corner office and spend that kind of money when you don't need it. You always need the expertise, I think, from the beginning of the company on, but you don't always need it full-time. So pay for it on an as-needed basis, get the expertise from, in my case, 30-plus years of experience in growing companies, fast-growing. I've been in companies that are on the Inc. 500 list of fastest-growing companies. I've lived through the popping of rivets and the pressure that brings when you grow that fast. And as I say in my tagline, decades of experience for a fraction of the cost. You need it. You can't possibly know everything there is to know about everything in the company. And even if you did, you wouldn't have the time to take care of it all. So delegate it.